Welcome to Biochemistry, the chemistry of life. And we are going to begin our discussion of biochemistry by looking at a living thing and breaking it down as small as possible. So the smallest unit that we can break matter into is the atom. And atoms come together to form molecules like water, for example. And molecules can come together to form larger molecules known as macromolecules, macro meaning large. And this is one example of a macromolecule. This is DNA, which is a nucleic acid. And those macromolecules come together to form organelles like the mitochondria, which we learned about in the last chapter. And then the organelles come together to form a cell. And the cells can come together to form tissue. This is epithelial tissue here. And the tissues come together to form a whole organ like the stomach. Organs come together to form an organ system. This is the digestive system. And these organ systems come together to form an organism like this baby over here. So that gives you kind of a map of how life can be broken down. So starting at the simplest, there are elements that make up all living things. And there are actually 6 elements that make up most of every single living thing. And those 6 elements are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And if you just look at their symbols, it actually spells the word chomps, which isn't really a word, but an easy way to kind of remember those elements. So if we take a look at this body over here, it's broken down into those different elements. And you can see oxygen makes up the most of our bodies. And then there's carbon and hydrogen, and then the other stuff. Here, calcium's listed, even though it's not one of the big 6, because calcium isn't as important in some other living things as it is in us. So it didn't make the cut in the 6 elements that make up living things. So these are the simple elements that make up our bodies, if you wanted to break us into components. And then next, we're going to take a look at water, because water is extremely important for life. And if you take a look at the Earth from space, it looks like a blue marble. It's described as the blue planet. 71% of our Earth is covered in water. In fact, we're made of water. 60 to 90% of every organism is water. It's one of the most important substances for life. So why? We're going to answer that question by taking a look at the chemistry of water. So water is what is known as a polar covalent molecule. And I know you learned chemistry last year, but let's just take a flashback, travel back in time to chemistry to see what did polar and what did covalent mean. So these are referring to bonds, which is what happens when 2 atoms form a relationship bond with each other. And you have 2 types. You have covalent bonds and you have ionic bonds. In a covalent bond, atoms are going to share their electrons with each other. And there are 2 types of covalent bonds, nonpolar and polar. In nonpolar bonding, they are going to equally share their electrons. And in a polar bond, they're going to be unequally sharing their electrons. And you're going to have a positive and a negative side to your molecule. Ionic bonds aren't sharing electrons at all. It's basically when one atom gives up an electron and the other one gains an electron. And you have one atom becoming a cation, one becoming an anion, and they are attracted to each other. And an example of that would be salt. Okay, so let's go and look at water. Water is polar covalent, so they are sharing electrons but not equally, and you end up having the oxygen become more negative and the hydrogens becoming more positive. They are unequally sharing their electrons. Now, because of this, hydrogen bonds can form between the hydrogen atoms and the negative oxygen. So we can take a look at this type of hydrogen bonding here, and you can see that water molecules can form these hydrogen bonds between each other, which leads us to 2 important properties of water. These hydrogen bonds lead to these important properties. The first one is cohesion. And cohesion states that water is attracted to other water molecules. Okay, and that's exactly what's happening here. You have one water molecule and it's attracted to this water molecule, which is attracted to this water molecule. This is called cohesion. Adhesion states that water is attracted to other polar molecules. So other stuff. And there's a nice little cartoon on the bottom showing you adhesion and cohesion. So this one here is cohesion. You have one water molecule telling the other one, I love you. That's cohesion. It's between 2 water molecules. This is adhesion because water is being attracted to other stuff. So this is called adhesion. And then here is surface tension, which we're going to take a look at later. And it's holding up this water bug. All right, so let's take a look at these properties of water, because adhesion and cohesion and the fact that water is polar covalent lead to some really important properties of water that make it an essential molecule for life. That first property of water is the fact that water is a universal solvent. Many compounds dissolve in water. In fact, more substances dissolve in water than in any other liquid. Okay, and just a little flashback again to chemistry, right? Remember, a solution is formed when one substance dissolves in another. So this is a solution. And if we look at it, solvents dissolve other substances. So that's the solvent. And the solute is what's dissolving in the solvent. Okay, so water is a universal solvent. This is important because nutrients can dissolve in water, nutrients like salt and vitamins and minerals and oxygen, and they can be transported to all your cells. They can diffuse through membranes. So this is very important for life. The second important property of water is the surface tension thing. So water molecules are attracted to each other, right? That's cohesion. So they kind of form a skin, and this is what we call surface tension, which some organisms can take advantage of. It allows these bugs, right here, these are called water striders, and they can rest on top of the water and move on top of the water because they don't break through the surface of the water. And also, surface tension allows water to form droplets because those water molecules are attracted to each other and they form this droplet. I'm going to show you a little video of an example of another organism that does this, that takes advantage of the surface tension of water. So this is the spider from your nightmares. Okay, it can walk on top of the water. It's been known to eat frogs. It's also been known to attack and swallow humans whole. I'm just kidding. This isn't Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. No, the spider doesn't eat humans, but it definitely does eat frogs and fish and such other organisms. But this type of this spider takes advantage of the surface tension of water, and there it is hanging out right on top of the water without breaking through and sinking. And it's just waiting for its prey. It's trying to hunt. It's trying to attack one of those fish. It's sensing vibrations. You can see that fish is definitely getting too close to the spider, which is completely still and waiting for the right moment to attack. So let's see how this plays out, because we've already come this far. We're emotionally invested in this. And we want to know how it's going to happen for this fish. So wait for it. Wait for it. Oh, it is pretty creepy. And there it is going after the fish. And it missed, so this fishy gets to live another day. Okay. The third quality of water that's really important is known as capillary action. Water uses adhesion and cohesion to basically move up tubes. This is what causes test tubes and straws to have something known as a meniscus, which you learned about in chemistry. And it's important for water transport inside of plants. You can see adhesion, cohesion, capillary action at play here in these carnations, which become colored when you place them into the colored water. Basically what happens is that the water is attracted to the inside of the tube or inside of the stem of the plant, and that's called adhesion. It's attracted to the inside and it pulls itself up. And now water is still attracted to the other water molecules, so it pulls up other water molecules with it, and that's cohesion. So adhesion and cohesion add to this thing known as capillary action, which is very important for plants. Okay, the fourth property of water is its high specific heat. Water resists changes in temperature. You might have gotten to this in physics, I'm not sure. But water resists changes in temperature. It heats up very slowly and it cools down very slowly, which is very important for organisms that live in the water because they don't have to deal with huge swings in temperature. And it takes a lot of energy to break the hydrogen bonds, so water boils very slowly. And this quality of water, high specific heat, moderates the temperatures on Earth. So we don't have such extreme changes in temperature that living things would not be able to endure. And we have this because of the high specific heat of water. And you can see this fish here is saying, I love the specific heat capacity of water because it can continue to live in this pond or in the ocean because all of it will not freeze solid very easily. Okay, the fifth property of water is that it has a lower density as a solid. which results in the fact that ice floats. And you can notice this if you have like a glass of Coca-Cola and you put some ice cubes in it, they float to the top. And this is important not just for your drink, but it's important because oceans and lakes don't freeze solid. The surface ice helps to insulate the water that's below. So here you can see this fishy again. When the temperature of the atmosphere falls below 0 degrees Celsius, the water at the surface gradually freezes to ice, but the water under the ice remains at 4 degrees Celsius. And that's the difference between being frozen and not being frozen, being alive and dead for that fish. All right, the fact that the water is not frozen solid underneath the sheets of ice. And you can see the sheets of ice here, so organisms can continue to live under it, even these extremely cold temperatures. Okay, so that was water. And we're going to get a brief introduction to organic chemistry, and that's where we're going to leave off today. So although the cell is mostly made of water, the rest of the cell contains these carbon-based compounds. These compounds make up all living things, and organic chemistry is the study of those carbon compounds. So why carbon? Carbon is a very versatile atom. It has 4 electrons in its outer shell. So right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it can share its electrons with other atoms to form up to 4 covalent bonds. This allows carbon to bond with a lot of other stuff. It can form bonds with one other atom, 2, 3, or 4 atoms, and it can form chains and rings and make these complex structures that make up living things. And there are really 4 major organic compounds that we're going to study, and that's going to be our next lesson. And they include proteins, nucleic acids, carbohydrates, and lipids. So I hope that was a useful introduction to biochemistry. Thank you for watching and listening.